Hey, welcome back. This is Boring History for Sleep. So tonight we'll be talking about something you don't often hear in history books. Before we begin, if you enjoy these calm journeys into the past, please consider subscribing or leaving a like. It really helps. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? You can share in the comments below. Now, let's get comfortable and begin. The medieval winter was not just a season. It was a world of its own. A world of long nights, pale skies, and endless cold. Imagine the year slowly turning toward its darkest point. The sun, once strong in summer, now slants weakly across the land, lingering only a few hours before retreating again. By November, the light itself seems weary. Shadows stretch longer, days shrink shorter. And for the medieval peasant, that change was not poetic. It was practical. It meant survival would now take a different shape. There was no central heating, no lamps to brighten the dark evenings, no cupboards full of food waiting to be opened. Life shrank with the season, and every breath, every task carried the weight of necessity. Picture a peasant hut on one of those first truly cold mornings. A structure of timber posts and rough wattle and daub walls, with a roof of thatch sagging under the frost. Smoke seeps slowly from a hole in the roof, but it is thin, not the billowing comfort of a roaring fire. The door rattles slightly with the wind. Cold air slips easily through cracks in the walls. Inside, the family lies close together. They sleep on a wooden frame filled with straw, or sometimes just on the packed earth floor, with only a blanket of wool or a few animal skins for cover. The warmth of bodies pressed together is the only real shield against the freezing air. Children tuck their feet under parents, parents curl around infants, elders settle near the centre, trying to hold the heat of youth beside them. The first to wake in the morning does not stretch luxuriously. Instead, they brace themselves. Breath curls visibly in the air, a pale mist hanging above their lips. Their first thought is of the hearth. Did the fire survive the night? The hearth is the heart of the hut, the difference between life and death. If embers remain, buried under ash, there is hope. They can be coaxed back to flame, carefully fed with dry twigs, blown to life with gentle patience. If the embers have died, the work is harder. Flint struck against steel, sparks catching in the smallest kindling. In the still dark hut, each second matters. The cold seeps in relentlessly, numbing fingers before the fire can be rekindled. Outside, the world is silent. The fields that once rustled with grain are now hard and bare. The soil itself is frozen, refusing the spade, resisting the plough. The labour of farming halts, but the labour of survival does not. In summer, the day was filled with ploughing, sowing, reaping. In winter, the tasks are different. Mending tools, patching clothes, feeding animals, conserving fuel, preserving food. Work does not end, it only changes its form. The animals too feel the season. Cows and sheep are thin from the year's grazing. They stand in stalls or crude shelters, chewing at stored hay, stamping the frozen ground. Chickens huddle together on their perches. Pig snorts softly, steam rising from its breath. The animals are not just beasts. They are part of the family's chance at survival. Their warmth adds to the hut. Their milk, eggs, or meat could mean the difference between endurance and starvation. The light that finally rises is pale and late. By the time the sun edges above the horizon, the day already feels half gone, and in winter, it is. Breakfast, if it can be called that, is meagre. A crust of coarse bread baked days before, made of barley or rye, dense and sour. Perhaps a smear of cheese, perhaps a sip of weak ale. The food is fuel, nothing more. There is no indulgence. Every bite must be measured against the long week still ahead. The memory of summer's harvest lingers, but it feels impossibly far away. The granary holds only so much. Barrels of salted meat, sacks of dried peas or beans, onions hung in braids, turnips stored in the cool earth of a cellar. It is not abundance. It is a slow rationing, a calculation that repeats every day. How much can be eaten now and how much must be saved for later? The cold itself is not just an annoyance, it is a danger. Frostbite, hypothermia, sickness. These words were not spoken as we know them, but their reality was understood. Too much exposure to the cold and fingers stiffen, toes blacken, lungs ache with coughing that will not stop. Clothing was a shield, but only a thin one. Woolen tunics, cloaks, patched leggings. Layers mattered, though they were heavy and stiff. Washing was rare, for removing dirt also meant removing warmth. Grease and grime became insulation. To be too clean in winter was to be too cold. At night, the cold pressed hardest. The hut darkened completely. Only the glow of the fire, carefully banked under ash, gave a dim red light. The wind whistled through gaps, carrying the cry of owls, the rustle of trees, the far-off howl of wolves in the forest. Families lay together, wrapped in whatever furs they had, listening to the sound of winter outside their walls. Sleep was not peaceful, it was survival, and yet, within this struggle, there was rhythm. The peasants knew winter. It was feared, yes, but also expected. Each year had its pattern, and winter was simply the hardest part of the circle. Stories were told around the fire, not for amusement only, but for comfort. Tales of saints and miracles, of beasts and spirits that haunted the night, of summers remembered and summers hoped for. Words carried warmth where fuel could not. Time moved slowly. Days blurred together. The long night stretched, but still, life went on. This was the beginning of winter for a medieval peasant, a season not of leisure or holiday, but of quiet endurance. The long night had begun, and with it, the months of testing every ounce of strength, patience, and resource they possessed. Each dawn was a question. Would the fire hold? Would the food last? Would the body endure? Each dusk was a small triumph. Another day survived. The long night of medieval winter was not glamorous, not romantic. It was cold, smoky, hungry, and dark. And yet, within it, the stubborn spark of human life continued to burn. If the medieval peasant feared hunger, they feared cold just as deeply. The bite of winter was not a passing discomfort, it was a constant danger. Imagine rising each morning, breath white in the air, feet touching a floor as hard and cold as stone. The first task is not food, not work, not prayer. The first task is warmth. Without it, nothing else is possible. The fire is the first priority. But firewood is not infinite. It has been gathered, chopped, stacked, and stored since autumn. Even then, it is rarely enough. A careless blaze can devour weeks' worth of fuel in a single night. A hearth allowed to burn too hot is a hearth that burns too fast. So, the peasant becomes a manager of flame. The fire is not a roaring centerpiece, it is a careful balance. A few logs, rationed, twigs and brambles gathered by children, cow dung dried in the sun months before, now pressed into service as fuel. Each piece of fuel has value. None is wasted. None is taken for granted. At night the fire is banked. Ashes pulled over embers to trap their heat, keeping them alive until morning. If the embers survive, it saves precious time and material. If they die, there is no choice but to spark the fire anew, burning tinder that could have been saved. Every night carries that tension. Will the fire live through the dark? And yet, even when the fire glows, it cannot heat the hut entirely. The hearth gives warmth only in a small circle. Step a few paces back and the chill presses in. The further corners of the home are cold, damp, almost untouched by flame. So the body itself becomes the furnace. Families press together under blankets, skins or straw. They share heat through proximity, relying on one another in ways both tender and necessary. A child tucked under an arm, a sibling curled against another's back, a dog or piglet kept inside for the night, their bodies adding to the pool of warmth. Animals were not only tools of labour or sources of food, they were companions in survival. Clothing too became armour against the cold. Wool was the fabric of life. Tunics, cloaks, hoods, leggings, all made from the same heavy, scratchy material. Linen undergarments, if available, softened the feel, though they offered little insulation. Leather boots or shoes lined with straw wrapped the feet. Gloves, if they existed, were crude. Many peasants simply tucked hands into sleeves. Garments were not changed daily. Washing was rare in winter. To undress was to invite cold deep into the skin. Clothes were worn until stiff with dirt, grease, and smoke. And yet in their heaviness they kept heat close to the body. Still, warmth required movement. Work itself became a kind of heat. Chopping wood in the frost, repairing fences, hauling water, tending animals, all generated the inner fire that flame and cloth alone could not provide. A peasant who stopped moving, who lingered too long by the hearth, risked stiffening into the cold. The rhythm of winter survival was one of motion and stillness. Gather fuel, stoke the fire, huddle for warmth, repeat endlessly. The dangers of the cold were not abstract. Hypothermia was not named, but it was known. A body too long in the snow grew slow, numb, heavy. A child wandering too far from the hearth might return with fingers stiff, ears burning red. Frostbite lurked at the edges of extremities, blackened skin, dead flesh, sometimes the loss of toes or fingers. The peasant had little defence against such things except vigilance and will. If someone shivered, they drew them closer. If someone stiffened, they rubbed their hands, breathed into their fingers, pressed them against their own warm skin. The human body was medicine as much as fuel or fire, and there was always fear. Fear that the stores would not last. Every meal eaten was one less for the future. Every loaf of bread cut was a step toward the end of the barrel. A winter too long, a spring too late, and hunger deepened into famine. Preservation was its own science. Salt, when available, was precious, sometimes more costly than meat itself. Smokehouses kept strips of pork or beef dry and edible. Dairy was turned to cheese to last through the cold months. Ale, brewed in autumn, was safer than water and gave strength to weary bodies, yet spoilage was a constant threat. A barrel of salted fish could rot unseen, ruining weeks of meals. A wheel of cheese might mould too far. Rats could chew through sacks of grain, their droppings spoiling what remained. The battle for food was not only against hunger, but against decay, pests, and waste. There were lean times when the pot held little. Families stretched meals with whatever they could find. Acorns boiled to remove bitterness, chestnuts ground into meal, even bark or roots in the most desperate years. Chronicles speak of famine years where people ate grass, weeds, or worse. The fear of such hunger lingered, even in better years, a shadow in every peasant's mind. And yet, there was ingenuity. Leftovers never went to waste. Bread, gone hard, was softened in broth. Fat, rare and valuable, was saved and used again. Even scraps of vegetable peelings found their way into the pot. Every crumb mattered. Every scrap had a second life. Feasts were rare, but they did come. Christmas brought meat, if only for a day. Festivals or weddings provided moments of plenty. These meals shone in memory, retold and remembered, as bright spots in a long dark season. But soon enough, the daily grind returned, the pot half full, the belly never quite satisfied. Winter was not simply endured, it was counted in meals. How many loaves remain? How many beans in the sack? How many days until the thaw? Each calculation was life or death, and so, the obsession with food was not greed, it was necessity. To think of food constantly was to live, to forget was to die. Still, within this constant struggle, there was resilience. The shared meal, however small, bound families together. The warmth of broth, however thin, gave comfort against the cold. And the act of eating, slow, grateful, deliberate, was itself a reminder that they had survived another day. For the medieval peasant in winter, food was more than nourishment. It was time measured in bites. It was hope salted in barrels, smoked in rafters, dried in sacks. It was life, preserved against the hunger of the world. Cold and hunger were heavy burdens, but sickness was their silent companion. In winter, illness was not rare. It was expected. The air grew damp, the huts filled with smoke, bodies huddled close together, and disease slipped easily from one to the next. Imagine the sound of a medieval village in January. Not only the crackle of fires and the crunch of frozen earth, but the coughs, low, rattling, constant. A child wheezing in the night, a grandmother hacking by the hearth, a father pausing at his work, bent double by sudden fits. Illness was woven into the season, the cold weakened bodies already strained by hunger. Thin food meant thin strength. A cough lingered longer. A fever burned hotter. Wounds healed slower. The causes were poorly understood. Germs were unknown. Theories spoke of bad air, of humours unbalanced, of God's displeasure. To live was to live under mystery. Why did one child fall ill while another remained well? Why did one fever pass and another end in death? These were questions with no certain answers. Common sicknesses shadowed winter, coughs that never left, pneumonia that filled the lungs and stole the breath, fevers that burned for days. Influenza, though unnamed, swept through huts and left the weak broken. Stomach ailments too, from spoiled food or unclean water. Dysentery, with its cruel toll, weakened many until nothing was left. And always the threat of plague, of contagion, of sudden sweeping illness that carried away not one but many. The remedies were simple, often desperate. Herbs gathered in summer and dried for winter use. Chamomile, fennel, mint, yarrow. Plants known not for cure, but for easing pain. Honey and warm water, if available, soothed a throat. Onion poultices pressed to the chest. Garlic eaten raw, believed to drive sickness out. Warmth itself was medicine. A sick one was wrapped in blankets, placed closest to the fire. Broths, thin but hot, were fed slowly. Rest was urged, though rest was difficult when hunger gnawed and cold pressed close. But many cures were more hope than help. Bleeding, to balance humours. Strange concoctions of wine, vinegar, or animal fat. Prayers whispered over bodies. Charms hung at the bed. For every genuine herb that soothed, there were remedies born of desperation, of fear, of belief.